Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am going to, Cecil, will you introduce for just a second while I step away and ask my son to put on headphones for his Zoom class? Because I think that's being heard through the door.
No worries.
I'll be right back.
Welcome to This Is Not Therapy Hour. That's Brendan Tessers, a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. This is a time where we invite people to discuss executive functioning, their struggles, their input, their questions with us. We have a topic each week, but we don't have to stay on topic, so feel free to ask any questions you'd like. This week's topic is about habits. Cool. And we can't hear you, Brandon.
I was muted. Appropriately today, you may notice that I am in a different location talking about habits. We're going to talk a lot about environmental cues and things. Excitingly, Effective Artistry will be opening new offices in about a month, June 1st. And so we're in kind of a transition period between now and then. So I'm working out of my bedroom for the next 4 weeks or however long. Yeah, habits today. All right. I assume you had time to give the whole intro spiel.
Yes.
Yeah, you got everything.
Cool. So yeah, today we're going to talk about habits, and then, we'll start as we usually do by just kind of creating some language together and then getting into questions about habits. So habits is an interesting concept. I like this word, even though, like in the past, there have been other words that we've talked about that get used a lot of different ways, and I talk about how much I hate them. This one I find it interesting because the idea I think that most people have about habits is this idea that there's a way to train yourself to do such and such a thing so that eventually you no longer have to even think about doing it. It just happens without any effort involved, right? And there's some truth to that. It's obviously a little more complicated than that. But what we're really talking about is, default responses to stimuli. Because as we've talked about before, we have finite resources. So as we go through our days, our lives, we cannot stop and think about, be conscious and aware and deliberately choose everything that we do. The vast, vast, vast majority of things that we do autonomically. Our brain just takes care of without us being aware of it. So meaning that, take walking, for example. I can consciously choose to walk. I can consciously choose to put one foot in front of the other. Most of the time, I don't. Most of the time, I consciously choose something like, I want to get a glass of water, and the walking part happens autonomically without my input. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Just responds while he's not looking.
Me.
I know.
Especially
ADHD people. We're not always looking when we are paying attention. In fact, sometimes looking away makes it easier. Anyway, so we have default responses to stimuli. If there was something about my stride, the way that I was walking, that was harmful, that was causing me a problem, I could theoretically change that. It would take a lot of time and effort and work to do that, to change it in such a way that from now on, when I walk, even if I don't think about it, I walk in the new way instead of the old way. And that's what we're usually talking about when we're talking about habits. What we mean is, for example, if we're talking about, I want to go for a run in the morning. I want that to be my habit, is to go for a jog every morning. So if our default response to the stimuli of waking up in the morning is to go for a jog, we call that the habit, right? So most people probably don't have that. Probably most people's default response, the response that happens if you don't put any effort or awareness into making a different choice, is you wake up and you slowly roll out of bed and grab some coffee or tea or something like that, right? And you can get yourself to do other things, but it takes effort to push past that first response. And when we're talking about habits, developing good habits, people are saying, can I switch it so that my default response will be getting up and going for a jog, and I don't even have to think about it. It just happens. The answer to that is kind of maybe, yeah. Does it make sense so far?
Yeah. So before we start talking about how to form new habits, I guess that sounds like where you're going. where do our habits start? Like, where do they come from, first off?
That's a
like,
great
I mean, there's a
question.
reason why we do the things we do, and like, why is that?
So we've talked in the past about the brain doesn't want to spend resources unless there's a reason. That's part of why because it's, worried about dying more than anything else. It's like, well, something might come up later that could kill us. So let's just save all resources that we can for that, just in case, and the intellect allows us, intelligence is the ability to be aware and make conscious decisions of things, and we can change all that. But what that means is, like we've talked about in the past, change requires discomfort, meaning when we talk about, usually when people use the word effort, part of what they're saying is like the physical energy you put towards a task, but part of it is that mental energy of like, no, I'm going to do this thing, even though I would rather do this other thing, right? Mm-hmm. Effort, resource expenditure, pain, suffering, they're all kind of the same deal, right? Like they're things we don't want to do. We'll do them if we think they're worth it or we have to or whatever. So where do our habits come from? We have billions, trillions of neurons in our brain and neural pathways where electrical signals pass from one neuron to the next neuron to the next to the next to the next. And everything that we do, autonomic or otherwise, consciously or unconsciously, it involves neural pathways. And every single time one of those neural pathways fires, every time that one neuron fires to another neuron, those two neurons become more closely linked through a process called myelination, meaning that the electrical signals will literally take less energy in order to transition from one neuron to the next the second time, and even less the third time, and so on and so forth. So energy takes the path of least resistance, right? Whatever our most developed neural pathways are, those are the ones that the brain is going to default to. We can consciously choose to do differently. Now, some people would argue about whether or not we can really choose anything at all, but I don't find that a very practical. It's an interesting theoretical debate, but for practical purposes, we all know the experience of when I'm choosing a thing, or when I'm aware of a thing, or when I'm not aware of a thing. So this is the trick about habits: is in order to make the new pathway the default pathway, you would have to theoretically do the new thing at least one more time than you did the old thing, in order to make the new pathway as myelinated as the old pathway, right? Okay. So developing new habits is almost never going to happen just in terms of do the new thing enough times and then it'll become the easiest thing. We can change it by changing the stimuli. If we change the environment, change the stimuli, then we can create a new pathway because the old pathways aren't as locked in because we haven't been exposed to this stimuli as much. So we haven't done it that much. Meaning we wake up every morning, right? So if you want going for a jog to be your new default, you'd have to do that every morning for, I'm almost 36, so I'd have to do it for 36 years before it became the new default. But if instead of doing it in the morning, what we're talking about is do it in the morning when your friend is waiting for you to go for a jog, well, that's not an experience that I've had very often. So I can develop that as the new default response to that stimuli. My friend is waiting for me in the morning. Then I don't have as entrenched of a way to try and have to make it easier. One of my favorite sayings is, to a person with a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That if your way of solving problems is by thinking your way out of them, then every problem that pops up, the first thing you're going to do is try to think your way out of it. If you solve your problems by being confrontational or being, giving to others, what's the word I'm looking for? Submissive, then you're going to default to that. And we can always push past the default, but it takes effort. And we talked in the past about energy, that when we have less energy, we have less of an ability to put that effort in. So habits, you hear things like, studies say that in order to form a new habit, you have to do the new thing every day for 10 weeks. And if you miss even a single day, you restart the clock. And I'm not exactly sure how they did that study. I'm not sure the methodology. It seems flawed that no matter what habit you're trying to do, you got to do it every day for 10 weeks, right? Seems like something that maybe got simplified as it was communicated to the public, potentially. There's just not universal rules like that. Some things are harder to do than other things. So to say that everything takes the same amount is a little bit silly, right? That's like the whole, everybody needs to drink 8 glasses of 8 ounce glasses of water every day. It's like, well, does that mean that, somebody who weighs 300 pounds and lives in a desert has to drink the exact same amount of water as someone who weighs 100 pounds and lives in the wetlands? Like, probably not. These are statistical averages, right? So that's what a habit is. It's the default meaning no effort, no awareness put into it. It's what happens when I don't pay attention. And most of the things that I'm doing in my day, I'm not paying attention to. I'm not paying attention to how I'm sitting right now, to how I'm moving my hand. Until I just said that, I wasn't consciously aware that was just happening. To change the habit, I've heard anywhere from 21 to 30 days to form a habit. Yeah. We get these general guidelines and they're helpful in terms of making the point that you need to do something a lot, and then it gets easier as you do it more and more. But how exactly do we define a habit, in that study, right? Half your weight in ounces for water. Well, that's interesting. I always find it interesting to look into the sources of these things, so that the study that was the 8 glasses of water a day was done by something called the Hydration Institute, which was the research arm of the company that makes Gatorade. Because you can always ask, who would be served by the idea that people should drink even when they don't feel like drinking? Anyway, which isn't to say, especially for neurodivergent people, that, you only need to drink if you feel like you want to drink. Interoception is a whole nother thing that we should talk about sometime.
But bring it back down to habits. Our habits are basically stuff that we've done for whatever reason. It's the way that we've been doing these things. And so it sounds to me a little bit like the term habit is almost arbitrary. It's just like a way of qualifying a single act that we do without thinking about it. Is that right? Like waking up. That's our habit. But like we only call it a habit.
Arbitrary. Sorry, go ahead.
It's like we only call it a habit if we were thinking about like, how can I change that? Does that make sense?
Usually, yeah. So in other words, like every word, yes, it is arbitrary and it's a construct, it's made up, and ultimately it means whatever each individual person is using it to mean. I find it useful to use it this way. So that's why we do this with all our terms, is define it in the way that we're going to use it because we think it's useful to do it. But I think ultimately you're right, yeah, Cecil, that usually when we say the word habit, what we're talking about is, here's a thing I do without really thinking about it, but I don't like it. That's a bad habit. Or here's a thing that I want to be doing, but it's so hard to get myself to do it. I want it to be easy to do without even thinking about it, is I want to develop a good habit, right? Yeah. That's usually when people tend to use it.
Yeah. Okay.
Really, like everything else, we're talking about how we spend our finite resource. It is an executive functioning issue. Executive functioning being the management of our resources. What things do we notice? What things do we spend things on? So do we have any questions to start with? Because I feel like that would be good. If not, we can come up with examples.
So we have one so far that, unless somebody else has one, it's like, when I'm hanging out with friends or doing a project that holds my attention, I'm unaware of time. What habits can I develop to be able to be more aware of time? Sorry, there's a typo.
More aware of time. That's a great question. So it's funny because this involves interoception. So just real quickly, in case you don't know, interoception is the sensory input from inside the body. So it's not a cognitive or metacognitive thing like we've talked about in the past. Saying I'm angry is a metacognitive thing. That's my observation and analysis of myself. Interoception means there are literally nerve endings inside your body that detect how full your bladder is, how full your stomach is, etc. And just like every other sense, those things, sometimes the brain, the process that determines what's worth coming into awareness and what's not, sometimes the brain says, yeah, that's relevant, let's bring it in. And sometimes it says, no, that's not important enough right now. Other things are more important and need the space, right? So interoception plays a big role in noticing the passage of time, because time, like everything else, is a construct, right? It's not a thing that we can directly observe. There are things that we can observe that give us, a sense of the passage of time. Obviously, a big one is clocks, right? That we have divided the day up into 24 hours and 60 minutes and blah, blah, blah. And we have ways to track that. And all of this is very useful, still arbitrary, but very useful, because now you and I can say, let's meet at 9 and reliably know that we can figure out what about that time means, as opposed to like, let's meet in the morning. What does that mean? So interoception plays a big role in noticing the passage of time absent external markers. Meaning if I have a clock that I'm looking at, then that will help me notice the passage of time. If I've got the windows open and the sun is rising or going down, that might help me notice the passage of time. Otherwise, though, I'm relying on my body's own internal sense. How does my hunger grow? How does my need to use the bathroom grow? How does my tiredness grow? And so when you're neurodivergent and your attention doesn't always go where you would like it to go after the fact, right? Like, here's an interoception thing that's pretty common for people with ADHD, especially, but neurodivergent people in general, that people don't tend to talk about because it's a little bit crass. But the experience of, I'm a little bit bored. Oh man, I really need to use the bathroom. But then something interesting happens or urgent or important happens. And now I'm focused on that. And my sense, my interoception falls out of working memory because it's no longer as relevant as these other things that are taking it up, and I lose the sense that I need to use the bathroom until 2 or 3 hours later when it's like, oh, I really need to go to the bathroom now. Or vice versa, people who will use the bathroom before going to bed, then get in bed 5 minutes later and there's no other stimuli, nothing else going on that's that urgent. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, I need to use the bathroom again, even though you just went, right? So this is a big part of why we have a hard time noticing the passage of time, especially like in this question, when I'm hanging out with friends or doing a project that holds my attention, meaning that the brain has dictated is more worth my awareness than my interoception. What habits can I develop to be more aware of time? Well, big one, and one that people use a lot, is give yourself external senses that give you a sense of the passage of time. Put clocks everywhere. Use visual timers. Use audible alarms and reminders. I like my little smartwatch thing. Is pretty simple and basic, but it buzzes, and that tactile sense is something that I notice, right? That helps me note the passage of time. This is one of the fun ways that the word habits gets used. It really just means like, I want this to be different. I want it to be different by doing something that is a habit, meaning I don't have to, I put work in on the front end, but then later on, I won't even have to pay attention to it. It'll just keep happening in order for me to be more aware of time. So those would be the easy examples. And we could get more specifics if we had more specifics of, what this person is doing, talking to your friends about, hey, can you guys help me remember, is potentially a thing, but that's not always, socially easy. Kitchquatch says, I make my MacBook tell me the time every hour. Yeah, that's a great way to do it. I use my Google Calendar for pretty much everything during the workday. And I have it set as a default that it yells at me 10 minutes before an appointment, because to me, that's enough time where if it yells, I don't feel like panicked and urgent, be like, I got to stop this thing right now. I can finish up what I'm doing, but it's not so long that I'm like, I don't need to worry about that. I still got a half hour, And one of the very simple and practical things that I have clients do a lot is, if you use your phone or your computer to give you audible reminders, go change the notification noise for the reminders so that it is a different sound than all the other notifications you get. And then you don't have to worry about, oh, that's probably just a text, I can ignore it. Or, oh, that's probably that new app that's been yelling at me and I haven't turned off notifications for yet. That for me, my calendar is Navi from Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. She goes, hey, listen. And nothing else on my phone does that. So when that happens, I know it's 10 minutes to something. And either that brings it up or I got to look. Yeah, put clocks everywhere. Eric Tivers, who hosts the ADHD Rewired podcast, that I was interviewed by him a little while back. Sarah actually was interviewed on his podcast as well. I made a comment on it the very first time we spoke. In the field of view of his Zoom call is like a clock here, a visual timer here, and on the digital screen, like a digital clock. I was like, okay, you really don't want me to lose track of what time it is and run along on this thing. And it's probably honestly more for himself than for anybody else. So get things that will externally give you that reminder of time, because you can't, if you're losing track of it, what you're saying is I can't rely on my internal sense, my interoception being reliable in noting the passage of time.
Okay. I mean, I struggle with this one a lot. Time is just not a thing that, sometimes to me, it feels like an alien concept because I'll be like, oh, when I'm doing something that like is taxing or dull, I'm like, oh, every second extends to a year. But then like when I'm doing something that's engaging, like, I'll be biking and all of a sudden next thing I know, I've been biking for 6 hours and I was like, oh, I did not realize that. Like, oh, there's an alarm. They turn it off. And then I'm like, oh, that's a good reminder. Also, I'm like, oh man, it's been 2 more hours since then. Like,
Yeah.
And so like I relate a lot to this question.
Oh, me too. I mean, Cecil and Sarah definitely know. I have a really bad, well, let's call it a habit for today, habit of running late on sessions, not starting late, like running long. As a therapist, my sessions are supposed to be 50 minutes long, and I have a tendency to run 60, 65, 70, 75 minutes, which then does make me late for the next one. Because during that time, I'm not focused on the things that are the markers of time. I'm focused on the person, and I'm looking for a resolution in what it is that we're doing more so than I'm watching the time. And I now have a second monitor that I put a big clock on when I do my sessions, and that makes it easier. But it's still something that happens, that I lose track of that time. We talk about time all the time because it is the most observable of those 4 universal resources we've talked about: time, energy, working memory, and attention. But each of those things influences the other. The less of your attention and working memory is spent on a thing, the more of your time and energy it will take to do the thing, and vice versa. So that is, the experience of time is subjective. And for some people, that causes more problems. It's more variable than for others. And yes, that tends to be neurodivergent and especially ADHD people. So yeah, you got to set up the environment to make it different. Like we're always saying, it's not just remember the time. It's put something there that you will see, that you will hear, that's novel or that's interesting, that you will notice, that your brain will be like, that's worth noticing. My notification noise, sometimes I just don't notice it. But my, hey, listen, Navi noise, my brain always is like, yeah, I'm aware of that. Pick a noise that you will notice,
So just because I'm going to piggyback on this question here. So for me, I have my phone silenced for like everything because I just don't do anything with it. If I'm also like not on my phone, or if like I'm biking, I like my music going, or it's just like biking and I don't have that sound, or I'm like hanging out with someone and talking with them and like my phone is who knows where. What could I do to like start that process? Like, you mean like okay, cool. I bike over somewhere and I see a friend and I'm like, oh hey, and I start chatting. Like, is there like some kind of, what can I do to like when I first start the interaction to like set these timers and start to be aware of time? Basically, that's what I'm asking. Let's put it that way.
Well, it depends on the specifics, as you're saying, right? Like that's the whole point of, if we give a generic answer of use your phone, well, what about when I don't have my phone? Okay, yeah, but then it depends on what you do have. So another thing, like you're bringing up, one of the times when you might not be with your phone is when you're talking to other people. So one thing you can do there is to say, when you start the conversation, like, oh, hey, good to see you. I have to run in 20 minutes, but let's chat or whatever. Or even just to say, to check in with the other person about the time, or to say, at the beginning of the conversation, say, hey, what time is it? Or to say, hey, I really want to talk with you. I'm going to get lost in it. And all these things depend on who the person is and the circumstances and your comfort level. But you can say like, hey, will you help me remember 20 minutes from now, I got to go move on to another thing because I'm going to get so into this conversation with you that I'm going to lose track of it. I'm worried about that, Or the alternative is that I'm going to not be able to get too into this conversation because I have to keep my mind on that. And I'd rather, whatever. That watches, again, especially smart watches, I like because you get that tactile input, and because you put it on your wrist and it's easy to wear while you're biking, or if you step away from your phone, that even if my phone is elsewhere, they sync up every time I'm near my phone, which is going to reliably happen every hour, a couple hours, every day at least, and then when I walk away, it's still going to buzz at me when it's time for me to go somewhere else. Some people, again, will notice tactile things more or less than other people. Okay. Yeah, there's a reason that ADHDers commonly get the advice to use visual timers or hourglasses, that having that visual perception of time as opposed to the, hands on a clock that takes a little bit more effort to decipher, or a digital clock that's a little more abstract. If I set a little hourglass timer, I can kind of see how much time I have left at each moment.
Yeah. We have another question too.
Just as a side note, while you're looking that up, Cecil, you can keep doing that. But, Cecil mentioned having a million notifications and ignoring his phone. Just as a default recommendation to everybody out there, go into your phone, turn off all push notifications, and then you can go back and turn on whatever ones you want, but make it an opt-in process instead of an opt-out process for you. If what like Cecil was saying, he gets a million messages and he doesn't check them. If you know that you're not going to check your messages, turn off the notifications for the messages. What's the point of them other than that just it diminishes your ability to pay attention to the notifications for other things that you might care more about?
Yeah.
Deal with the reality that exists. Actually, someone told me very recently, we can fight the ocean and the tides, but you're not going to have a lot of success there, and you're going to throw a lot of your resources at it. Or you can observe and learn how the ocean works and build your strategies and build your structures and build your systems around that, which allow you to work with this natural process that contains so much power that you can tap into if you observe it and understand it first, as opposed to trying to make it do what you want it to do. If you're already not listening to your notifications for your messages, turn it off. That was Cecil that told me that yesterday.
I was just going to chime in and say that. I was like, wait, wasn't that Cecil?
Because of my years of working with dogs, it's like, why
I like it, yeah.
make everything work with you? Like, there's no point in battling. It takes so much energy and time, and you have to constantly maintain that. So, like, lean into it. If it was do the thing that costs the least amount and is the easiest to do. So
right. Or, the way I'd modify that just slightly is, if you're going to fight a battle, make sure that there's not a better option first, and make sure that it, that's part of why we're saving our resources, is so that when a battle comes up that is important, we have the resources available for it.
And then here's our next question. Thank you for that. It's like, what should I do when I've established a daily habit that's really helpful for me, but then 3 weeks later, I forget to do it for a couple of days, and it's so hard to get back into it?
So this is a great question, and this happens all the time. There's a couple generic answers, and then, but I guess before we get into the generic answers, we'll say this is one of the ones where the specifics matters a lot. What changed on the day when you were doing it every day for 3 weeks, and then one day you miss it, and you miss it for a few days? Once you realize, because it might, usually when this happens, you're not aware of the fact. In other words, you were putting a lot of awareness into doing the thing. It was not a habit in the sense that we're talking about it. It was a daily habit in the sense that it was something you did every day, but it took effort and awareness to do. And then something changed that either meant that the effort, the energy that you were putting into making it happen was no longer available, or for some reason the cost of the thing went up, the value of the thing went down, something happened. So if you've missed it for a few days, you can go back and start to analyze what changed. Don't worry about why did I stop at first. Always start with just what was different. I don't care if I can connect this difference to that difference. I'm just looking for correlations. The day that I stopped going for my runs, on that same day, I also, tried a new smoothie at a new smoothie place. I don't know. Like whatever stuff.
When you talk about like what's different, you're talking about like, oh, it was rainy that day, or you say like, oh, I was just so tired when I woke up. Are those both valid, or are those both?
Those are both valid, and those are both differences. But again, those are ones where, and that's where you're going to start, of course, is like, what are things that I can easily identify how they might have impacted me going from doing it to not doing it. Mm-hmm. But if you can't find an easily workable answer, a useful, remember, we don't care about accurate, we care about useful. If you can't find something in that way that allows you to change it and get back into it, then let go of the idea of what was connected to it and just start saying anything that was different. I started watching this show that day, because anything could be connected in ways that you're not aware of. So that's one thing that you can do. The other generic thing is, really make sure that you have set up, we've talked about observation in the past, really make sure that you set up a way to observe, especially in terms of last week's conversation about goals, in a way to observe progress towards goals. If you're doing a new habit, you're doing it because you want it to build you progress towards something, or because the new habit is in and of itself enjoyable, right? That it's not about making progress towards a thing. It just is an enjoyable experience all on its own. And we'll break those two things down here as we get into the second part of this question. But if you're setting up a habit like going for a jog, now some people the jog itself is enjoyable, for other people the jog is not enjoyable, but I want to be in better shape or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Then set up a way for yourself to observe, because it takes resources to do the new habit, resources that you were not spending on it originally or would have already been a habit, and now you're trying to get yourself to, because it gets you towards something in the future. You have to give your mind, your brain, the connection of, I'm doing this and it results in this thing. I'm doing this because I want to lose weight, for example, and I'm observing my weight and it's going down. Now the brain still might do its calculations and be like, well, the amount of effort that it takes to do that is not worth the amount by which my weight is going down. But you're going to be better off than if you just say, I want to do this so I'm in better shape, in that vague kind of a way. Mm-hmm. And then don't check in whether you're getting into better shape or not.
And that kind of ties into goals that we talked about last week.
Right. That you need to be able to assess. There's not anything that's going to take you, there are very few things that are going to take you all the way from one side to all the way to the other. Most things that you do, habits, strategies, whatever, are going to get you a little bit closer to what you want. And if you're not keying in to being able to observe that, it's just, I've been so tired, I want to be rested. Well, I should start trying to go to bed earlier, and I do really good at it for 3 weeks, but I'm still tired. I'm just not as tired as I was before, but I'm not observing it. So every day I'm just like, I'm tired. Well, about 3 weeks or so in, I'm going to forget the natural remembering of how tired I was 3 weeks ago versus how tired I am now. And it's like, I'm still tired. So why the hell am I putting so much effort into like going to sleep early? Oh. Observation is a big part of it. One very common reason this end here, why is it so hard to get back into it, especially when the new habit is just something that's in and of itself enjoyable, is that you are treating it as a failure. Like we talked about back in the day, using your tools as tools instead of as taskmasters, that when your planner says do this thing and you don't do that thing, it's because the person you were when you made the plan had less information than you currently have and made a guess about when would be a good time to do the plan, and the guess was wrong, and so we just modify it. But if you treat it as, no, I set a perfect plan in place, I knew everything that I needed to know, this plan is perfect, I am now failing by not doing it. It does make it a lot harder to get back into it, because now you're saying to yourself, I've been trying to do this forever and never been able to. And then finally I got myself to do it, and I did it for 3 weeks, but now I fell off again. It's like, why even try? Like, if I do it for 3 weeks, I'll just fail 3 weeks from now. As opposed to, I was doing it for 3 weeks, then I didn't do it for 3 days. Now I'm doing it again. That there's no failure, there's no value attached to that. And that can be facilitated by looking at, like we talked about, those correlations, so that you can have guesses and theories about what are the reasons that I stopped for 3 days or forgot for 3 days or whatever. And now I can get back into it. Well, it was cold for 3 days. I didn't want to jog when it was cold. Now it's warmer, so I'm getting back into it. As opposed to, I failed. Even though it was cold, I should have gone for a jog. I'm the worst. And now it's warm, but I'm not even noticing that, because I'm not explaining my failure to jog for the last 3 days in terms of the temperature. So why would I pay attention to the temperature? I'm just explaining it in terms of my own deficiency, and that hasn't changed. So there's no, I can't do it now either. Right?
But it's like, a little off topic, where we're like Three Little Pigs, and I know it's like a different take on Three Little Pigs, because the idea is like, if we think about habits and these things, it's like each little pig in their house, like that first one that had straw, it wasn't like, let me rebuild this house for the wolf to, it's like, no, let me go someplace different and try something different here. And they just keep going and getting the support they need until they're in a safe, secure environment. So
yeah. Well, and that's another common reason that it can be hard to get back into a thing, is not necessarily the sense of your own deficiency and failure, but maybe the habit, the idea wasn't worth it. that even if you were observing that the results, that it turns out that the effort you were putting into, the resources you were putting into doing the thing is not worth what you get out of it. And after about 3 weeks, the brain has done enough assessment to say, yeah, we thought it would work. It's not working the way we think it would. Even if it is working some, it's not worth what we're putting into it or whatever. And so now let's just move on to something else. So sometimes it's about saying, okay, that didn't work. Let me find a new thing that works, instead of, again, going back to the sense of the self as deficient. I can't do anything. Nope, that thing didn't work for me. I had reason to believe that it would. It works for other people. It seemed like it should have worked. I made my guess that it would. Turns out it didn't. And again, how do you know the difference? You just have to keep checking in with yourself, right? But that gets a lot easier if you let go of the idea of being a failure.
Okay. We have another question here from
Kitch Squatch.
Yeah, I don't know how to say that, but if I don't want to feel hungry, I should keep myself busy, as in the opposite of going to the bathroom when you're no longer distracted.
That will absolutely work. Whether you want to do it or not, that depends on what it is that you're doing, right? Like the specifics. But yes, in other words, think of anything that is hard for you to do, maybe even we might say impossible, right? Like, I cannot get myself to start on this. Well, if there's a reason that there's this hypothetical scenario that I hate of, if someone put a gun to your head or whatever. But if I like to switch it to, if I said to you right now and you believed me, it was true, that I will give you $1 million right now if you do the thing, then you probably will, right? That, like we've talked about, cost and value. We try to focus on bringing the cost down, but manipulating value does work. That's why people do it. If I make it that much more important, then it might happen. So same thing here. No matter how stressed you are, we were talking about anxiety a couple of weeks ago, right? No matter how anxious you are about a social interaction or about climate change or about whatever thing, if all of a sudden there's a lion and roaring in your face, you're going to stop being anxious about the other things because the resources are more necessary for this. So yes, keeping yourself busy will diminish if what you're doing to keep yourself busy is stuff that the brain actually acknowledges as worth the resources, worth the space and working memory, worth the attention, more worth it than the hunger, then you'll feel the hunger less. Yeah. But another way to think of this too is, so distract myself and lose weight. Yeah, it can work. I mean, depending on why it is that you have the weight that you have. Sometimes it's not just about how much you're eating, but it's when you're eating or what you're eating or what physical activity or what medical condition or whatever, right? But yeah, if you distract yourself from anything, you're not thinking about that thing as much. Hunger is one of those. I'll add that hunger in particular is one of those words that, because it's a universal experience, we all assume we mean the same thing when we say hunger, and we do not. When I say hungry, what I mean is I want to eat that thing. And I didn't even know this about myself until, recently. I just thought that's what everybody meant when they said hunger is, oh, I want to eat a thing. Like, consciously, I want to eat a thing. What I have realized is that for me, a couple different factors that weigh into that is, yeah, boredom. If I'm like just watching TV or something, I want the stimulation, the extra sensory input of, crunching on things. I care more about the texture than the taste. And another is desirable food. Like if what's in front of me is something delicious that I love, especially if it's something I don't get to eat often, I could be full as hell. I could be in pain because of how full my stomach is, and I'm still going to eat this thing. Whereas I'm not sure about this, but I assume that some other people, when they say hungry, what they actually mean is the sense of there not being food in the stomach. Mm-hmm. I don't notice that. I have tried. I don't know how to notice that. The first sign of that kind of hunger, organic hunger, that I notice is my hand shaking. And it's happened to me not much in the last few years, but if you ask my wife, especially early on when we knew each other, every week, couple weeks, there would be a day where just like 3, 4, 5 in the afternoon, I'd be like, oh, I guess I need to eat food. Like it's a more conscious process. Low blood sugar. So yeah, give your brain, we talked too about there's no mechanism to decrease the amount that you are noticing a thing or thinking of a thing, but there's a mechanism that allows you to increase the amount that you're thinking a thing or noticing a thing. So if you're hungry, being like, don't be hungry will make you more hungry. But if you're hungry and then you go play a video game that you really love, then yeah, you'll forget the hunger. You'll notice it less.
Yeah. I relate to that food thing. Is like, what I think about hunger is, I have fast metabolism. As a kid, I would throw up, like I would get stomach cramps. I started like throw up stomach acid if I didn't eat because I was just not paying attention. And I was like, oh, I just needed constant food in me. So I'm like, but it goes back to like goals and all these things, and like you in the fight and flight kind of ideas of anxiety of like this building that metric of yourself of like oh, like when I start getting hungry, what are the telltale signs of that?
Right.
Interesting.
And when we were talking about anxiety and talking about coping is good, but prevention is better, that's a great metaphor for it. That if you only think of anxiety, if you only observe it the way that you were observing hunger as a child, is like, I don't even notice it until I'm throwing up stomach acid. Then it's great to be like, okay, if you're throwing up stomach acid, eat some food, eat this kind of food. It'll fill you up. It'll restore nutrients or whatever. This is best and efficient and easy as opposed to something you have to prepare or whatever. Great. All those are coping skills. But then we also want to be like, and what do we do so that you can notice that you're approaching that state and do things beforehand, or build in routines and structures and supports and systems so that whether you notice that you're approaching the state or not, you just never do. I now eat the same thing for every breakfast and every lunch. And I know for some people that probably sounds like very like dull and sad. For me, I don't care. I've never been into food that much for the taste of it. I like the texture a lot more, like I said. So even though I'm not feeling like eating in the morning, I know that I need to, but I need to make it easy, because if it's something I got to prepare, then it's going to take me more effort. And there are going to be more mornings where it's like, I know I should, but I really don't want to like prepare a whole omelet right now. So every morning I eat a protein bar and a banana. And every lunchtime I eat an apple and a Greek yogurt. All things that are very easy to eat, very quick, things that I can take with me if I need to get working on something or go somewhere, be with the kids. My protein bars, I get Kind bars, and I've set up a subscription so that 40 new bars are delivered to my house every 45 days. So I don't even have to think about that, right? We have, especially when we talk about like depression and anxiety and some of these other things, depression in particular, people have a hard time getting themselves to eat. And again, everyone defaults to value. Like they just got to know that it's important to eat, that if they eat, they'll feel better and whatever. Sure. But the other way is to decrease the cost. Figure out something that they enjoy eating, or at least don't mind eating, that's super easy to eat, and make it as easy and available as possible. Put it in their room. Here's a box full of that stuff that you like to eat, Then you don't have to be like, come on, please eat. It's there. It's easy. They're more likely to eat it more frequently, right?
I like how we're talking about like, oh, how do we get access to food better? And people in the chat are most like, oh, how do we like, for dieting and stuff? And so it's like, oh, there's a big difference between those two things.
Everyone has their different experience.
But it seems the same thing. It's like, if, like you're trying not to like just consume empty calories and mass things. Cause it's important first off to like, that if you, with weight, it's always important. Like talk to a medical professional about it. And like, if it's a concern, but like, cause there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about with social pressures and like body image and all sorts of other things in our world that like put pressure on there, that weight loss isn't such a big deal.
Well, remember, like when we talked about goals and markers, nobody cares about weight. You care about how you feel, or how you think you look, or how you think other people think that you look, or how your clothes fit, or, those are the things you care about. You're using weight as a marker. So just make sure that you're looking at things. And I'll add too, as much as I support what you're saying, Cecil, see a medical professional, that medical professionals are not exempt from biases and social pressure, that some will say you should lose weight when you don't need to, and some will say you should gain weight when you don't need to. And, you have to trust yourself. But yeah, the more information you can get from other people, and the more of that you get from people who are experts in the field in which you are trying to get, the more information you have. Doesn't mean that they know everything all the time, but still a good idea. And by the way, everything we were just talking about, flip it around for the opposite. We're still talking about habits, right? You want to eat less? Sure. Put more fun, distracting things around. That'll work. Also, get the stuff out of your house that you like to eat.
Make it more difficult to have those things. If it's if we need to like, lower the cost and increase the cost to make it harder to do.
Right. make it so, I mean, I've definitely had this experience. I imagine most of us have, where it's like, I'm hungry, meaning my version of hungry, where it's like, I just want some stimulation. So I go look in the pantry and I go look in the fridge, and it's like full of food. If I actually needed calories, there's all kinds of stuff there, but nothing that like is easy or enjoyable. So I'm like, oh, there's nothing to eat. And I walk away. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, I'm hungry. And I go look at it again. Oh, there's nothing to eat. So, give yourself things that you have to prepare. Or a very common thing here too is like, buy a bunch of, Cecil's favorite, bell peppers. Cecil hates bell peppers. Buy a bunch of veggies on Sunday or whatever day you have the most time, and dice them all up all at once. Like meal prep is a version of this, right? If you meal prep all at once, that's easier. And then throughout the week, you're more likely to grab the thing that you prepared because it's easy and it's there, as opposed to going and, eating something else that you don't want yourself to eat. Treat your future self like Cecil would say, like a dog, like a different person, like a child, like whatever you want to say. Treat your future self as though you cannot expect that your future self will agree with your current self. So while you're thinking this, change the environment so that your future self has a different set of options.
And set them up for success.
Yeah.
Like, do yourself a favor, make it easier for yourself to succeed.
So in terms of habits, make it easier for you to do the thing that you're trying to do if you're trying to develop a good habit. Make it harder for you to do the thing that you're trying to stop doing if you're talking about getting rid of a bad habit. You're trying to quit smoking? Throw all your cigarettes away. Can you still go to the store and grab a cigarette? Yeah, but it's going to be harder, and therefore there are going to be times that if you had a cigarette right there, you would probably smoke it, but if you have to go to the store to get one, you might not. If you have a hard time putting away your social media, your phone at night, set up your, different phones have different things and you can get apps for it, but like Android has built in a digital well-being thing. There's an app called Help Me Focus that I have used, where I set time limits for different apps, and like after 9 p.m., don't let me get on Twitter or whatever, right? And there's a password, so I can still enter in the password and get on. But that extra step, it's a random password that changes every time, and it's like 12 digits and involves percent signs and stuff. And that gives me some time to be like, yeah, I don't care that much, right? Because that's a habit. Like web browsing is very much one of these things. Everybody pretty much has that thing where they log on to the computer or open up their phone, and without even thinking about it, you go to that website, your default website. And then you check if there's anything there, and then you go to the next one. That's your second default, and the third. And sometimes you get into a cycle where by the time you finish checking the fifth, you just go back to the first, and then the second and the third, and Reddit and Twitter and whatever. But if you disrupt those patterns, then that creates cognitive dissonance. But that's a term that is used differently than it originally. Yeah. It creates the opportunity for you to become aware. If you disrupt the habit, the autonomic process, then you have more of an opportunity to check in and be like, wait, what's happening? Because you either are going to have to consciously overcome the obstacle in order to continue the habit, which involves your awareness. So you become aware of the thing, but then once you're aware of it, you can say, oh, wait, is this what I want to be doing? As opposed to it's just what I'm doing.
So today's advice is make life difficult for yourself.
Make it difficult for you to do things you don't want to do. Make it easier for you to do things you do want to do.
Yeah.
I know I have the issue, and I think a lot of people do, where it's like, I have an intention of, I got to look up how to do this or whatever. And I pull up my phone, and before I even know it, I've already opened Twitter because that's my default. And then I'm like, oh, I'll just check, real quick. And then I'll get back to the other thing. And 5 minutes later, I'm like, gosh, what was I meaning to do here? Now I've just gotten into Twitter. What was it? And you lose it, This is also a hypnosis technique, disrupting patterns. Disrupting patterns is for breaking bad habits, for bringing awareness to things, novel data, new, different things, challenging things, unpleasant things. Those are the things that the brain is going to be more likely to bring into awareness.
So in 30 Rock, Jack Donaghy was correct when he hired that person to just randomly attack him to keep him on his toes, right? So is that like...
that is probably a ripoff of the Pink Panther. But Yeah, I guess if what you were trying to do there is get yourself to be vigilant.
Hey, listen.
There it is. That's my 10-minute noise. I got a session in 10 minutes. See how noticeable it is? See how it disrupted everything I was just in the middle of saying? No, that would make him vigilant. Vigilance is usually not a good thing because that means you're spending your resources on watching out for danger. So, but yeah, if you get hurt, the more frequently and the more unexpectedly you get hurt, the more you're going to start spending your resources on like what's, you know.
I know it's a ridiculous example, but it does give you a chance to see an extreme version of that. And so you can start to say like, cool, like in my everyday, if I treated it like that, how would I build those things and that structure to like,
well, just remember that it's all a trade-off. If you're being vigilant about that, there's something else you're not noticing. So yeah. we want our attention to go where we want it to go. And the whole joke that I don't remember this in 30 Rock, but the whole joke that's ripping off from the Pink Panther is Pink Panther had his, faithful companion Kato who would randomly attack him. But the joke in the movies was that every time he's not the Pink Panther, I should have said that, but Clouseau. No, the Pink Panther's the diamond that's stolen. Anyway, Clouseau has his friend Kato, or I don't know if it's like his butler or what, and it's something, attack him randomly. But every single time Kato does it, Clouseau's like, not now. But the instructions have been given of like, no matter what I say, just do it. But it's always at a terribly inconvenient. And to me, that joke works because of what we're talking about. That like, sure, it sounds good at the time to be like, I want to always be ready. But no, actually, it sucks to always be ready. It sucks that when you're wanting to focus on something else, like a date you've brought over to your house, I think is something that happens in the movie. That like, oh crap, I got to pay attention to this thing I don't want to pay attention to. It's also kind of like the Dwight Schrute thing of, expose yourself to a bunch of germs so your immune system gets strong. No, people, come on. like character building and resilience, all this stuff that if we let children struggle and suffer and fail, being dead, if we let people hurt and fail and struggle, then they'll learn. No, they might, because
learn something, but it's not always what you think.
Yeah. One, that increases the value. It's like, you better figure out how to fish, otherwise you're going to starve to death. But that is not a good way to learn. That is not optimal conditions. The best way to learn is to support somebody in learning. I really hate all that stuff that's like, nah, if you help people, you're really hurting them. It's like, really? Because I teach them that, they can rely on support or ask for help. If what you're saying is, I do this for that person and therefore they don't know how to do it, it is correct to say that if you stop doing it and it needs to be done, they'll either find somebody else to do it or they'll do it themselves. But that's for you, not for them. And that's totally fine too, by the way, to set boundaries, be like, yeah, I'm done like doing your laundry, 18-year-old, it's time for you to learn or whatever. But that process will still go better if you teach them how to do it, if you support them in it, if you scaffold it, as opposed to being like, figure it out.
It's almost as if you're helping them develop a new habit and you need to stack it so that it's easy for them to do it, so it becomes self-maintaining instead of a burden where
this is habits. Learning and habits are the same thing. Let me make it easy for you to do this, and then the neural pathways that fire. In fact, interestingly, as best we can tell, the brain does, again, not have a mechanism that helps it to distinguish between it doing a thing itself versus it watching somebody else do a thing. So in other words, if I've never swung a golf club before, if I'm given a golf club and told hit that ball with that club, versus if I watch somebody else swing the golf club several times, there's going to be a big difference in my first attempt at doing it because I have learned by watching the other person. So yeah, make it easy for yourself, not more important, easier. Making it more important will work, but it will cost the resources that it costs. If it wasn't important enough before, that means intrinsically it's not important enough. It's not worth the resources it takes. You can make it more important, but that means it still costs that amount of resources, which is more than it is intrinsically worth to you. So whatever that is that you're doing to modify that value, you're going to have to keep doing it. Otherwise, that question of I did it for 3 weeks and then I stopped, sooner or later, you're not going to put in whatever it is you need to put in to modify the value, and you're going to stop doing the thing. Lower the cost is always better if it's an option in terms of doing something repetitively. If it's a one-time thing, a lot of times it's better to just up the value, get it done, but still those resources then can't go to other things. So it's just that lowering cost also takes resources, and you got to figure out where that balance is.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I want to do another question, but I don't know if we have time for that.
Do a quick one. I like doing a real quick, practical one right at the end.
I mean, I don't know, now those feel so generic and stuff.
Do we have a specific one?
Let's start morning habits. If you want to start, or actually, this is something that I don't know if we talk about. So we a lot of times people talk about habits they want, and so we've recently talked about things people want to not be doing. What are ways of breaking habits essentially? I don't want to be snacking so much, and because we talk about Weight Watchers and
modify the environment. Modify the environment to make it more difficult to do. That can include, move the food away, get rid of food you like, and only food that you don't like but is nutritious. Then you're like, blah, blah, blah. It can also mean talking to the other people around you in the environment and saying, this is what I'm trying to do. Will you help keep an eye out for if I'm doing it or not doing it, and tell me about it. Also, like last week, negative goals are not achievable. Positive goals are. Or another way to say it is, scientifically, we can never prove a negative, only a positive, right? Ask yourself instead, meaning I don't want to do this thing anymore is a negative goal. Why don't you want to do it anymore? What are the resources that are going to it that would be freed up if you didn't do it? And if those resources were freed up, what would you want to spend them on? So now your new goal then instead becomes, I want to do this. Instead of doing that, I want to do this. Especially in relationships, people will often have goals of I don't want to fight anymore. Okay, so what do you want instead? Do you want to just not interact at all? Do you want to have fun interactions? Do you want to, be professional but interact minimally and only around these topics? What do you want instead will help you. But otherwise, the stuff we've been talking about, making it more difficult to do, disrupting the patterns. In fact, I'm a little hesitant about even putting this one out there, but there is an old therapeutic intervention called Prescribe the Symptom, where if somebody, for example, wants to smoke less, they smoke a pack a day and they want to smoke less and nothing's working, that the therapist, you'd have to do a lot of evaluation. That's why I'm hesitant to put it out there, but to make sure what's safe and what's okay and whatever. But a therapist might say, okay, I want you to go up to smoking 2 packs a day instead of 1, because now I have disrupted the pattern. I've shown myself that I do have influence and am able to change this thing in a way that was easier. It was easier to get myself to smoke more than less. It's probably worse for me, but it opens up that I can now follow up with, so I can change it. And how did I change it to do more? And what can I learn? But that should really only be done with a therapist who knows what they're doing, or some professional that knows what they're doing. Otherwise, you're liable to just be doing it more and more and more, as opposed to opening yourself up to changing it and to doing it less.
Awesome. Cool. So that is, we lose you there, Brandon. Looks like you froze there, but
I'm back
cool.
now. But we got to wrap up. It was fun to be with you all. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to run and let Cecil wrap up.
Awesome. So this is, I'm going to go on the big screen now. We're Effective Artistry. Catch us here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And we also do our streaming in the evenings. You can check out our website for that. It's Executive Functioning Neurodivergent Mind. Feel free to join in that. You got to log in stuff, but that's just so you can join the Zoom webinar. We have turned some of those recordings into a podcast that you can check out on our site. And it's free for everyone. So if anyone needs those resources, please feel free to utilize them. You can contact us at any time at effectiveartistry.com. Follow us or contact us through our Twitch or Instagram at _artistry, and catch us here next week. Thank you guys for joining us, and hope you guys have a wonderful day.